This Sunday on Capital Connection, the candidates come to town.
I'm the most capable person of being governor of Illinois.
A long line of politicians seeking high office in the state line up at the State Board of Elections to drop off their petition signatures, hoping to appear on the ballot this June.
Raising wages and creating jobs. We're going to bring people back to Illinois.
Politicians painting very different portraits of Illinois depending on which party they're in. Joining us this week, Comptroller Susana Mendoza, as the state tries to earn another credit ratings upgrade.
We Democrats, we balance the budget.
Taxes and wasteful spending is out of control. People are outraged.
And former House Speaker Mike Madigan arraigned in court. He pleads not guilty to 22 counts of federal corruption charges. It's all coming up on Capital Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol Bureau Chief Mark Maxwell is asking the tough questions. This is Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell reporting from the Illinois State House on this Sunday, March 13. This week started with the annual pilgrimage to Springfield for many candidates running for higher office. They had to get their petitions into the State Board of Elections so they could appear on the ballot come the primary, which is this June 28. Republicans and Democrats alike camping out in long lines at the State Board of Election overnight Sunday night and into Monday morning so they could drop off those petitions and make their case. Democrats arguing that Illinois is headed in the right direction, and Republicans saying that under Democratic control, Illinois is trending downward.
Under J.B. Pritzker, crime is out of control. Taxes and wasteful spending is out of control. Corruption is out of control. And we need a new direction in this state, and we're going to take it back. Avery and I, we're going to make things happen. People are outraged and people are scared. People are moving out of the state. People are pulling their children out of school, public school. I mean, what? I don't know what else to do.
I offer the people of Illinois solutions instead of outrage. The missing ingredient is leadership. We need leaders that can listen to the people of Illinois, learn, and then lead our state in a manner that brings us together.
We're talking to the working families and voters all across the state about the issues that matter to them, the kitchen table issues like investing in education, making sure that their kids can get a good college education for a low cost, making sure that we're protecting people's retirement income, and raising wages and creating jobs.
I've been building businesses, rebuilding businesses all my life, and I got to tell you, I'm the only outsider that's ever created thousands of jobs and built many businesses in the state of Illinois. I feel the pain of what Illinois is doing to small businesses, so I'm the person that's going to change that. We're going to bring people back to Illinois.
We're doing what we can in the state of Illinois. We've introduced a package of relief for families across the state. Eliminating the grocery tax, freezing the gas tax, and lowering property taxes for people across Illinois. So there's more that we can do. We're going to work very hard, but I want to remind you that the only reason that we're able to do these things is because we Democrats, we balance the budget, and we have a $1.7 billion surplus, which allows us to help.
Illinois' budget has a bit of breathing room in it this year, and lawmakers are now debating how they should spend some of that money and how they can use that breathing room to set up the state for a better long-term fiscal future. Joining us now is the state's comptroller. She cuts the checks and manages a lot of the state's debt as it is shifting a lot these days. Good to have you with us, Susana Mendoza.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's interesting. Illinois had, I think, $60,000 in its Rainy Day Fund just recently. And
yep.
This is a long-term cushion that many states have. Is there any state in the country that has a worse rainy day fund than Illinois?
Unfortunately, no. When we were hit by the pandemic at that time, so, what was that?
Early 2020.
Yeah, early 2020. At that moment in time, we had about $60,000 in our rainy day fund, which is not enough to even cover 30 seconds worth of government operations. So we were in no condition to be able to weather an economic downturn at that time.
And in years past, Illinois would just sort of shovel over a little bit of money into this fund whenever there was some lying around, if there was a little bit of money here and there.
On 3 occasions over the last 20 years. So they were small amounts. The largest amount, I think, was about $200+ million, but that's not even 1% of revenues. And you, at the very least, would want to have 5% of revenues of your budget essentially reflected in a rainy day fund.
So Governor Pritzker's budget this year would call for putting a lot more money into that rainy day fund, but that was a one-time proposal. You make budgets 1 year at a time.
Yes.
Are you proposing a different idea to lock that in permanently?
Yes. Number one, I think it's really important that our state get in the habit of not spending every single dollar that comes in, right? And so what we have to do is, just like people do at home, they receive their money, they don't spend it all. They save some, they pay their bills, right, which is what we should do first and foremost, and then extra revenues that you have left over, you should set aside some into your own emergency rainy day fund. So the state should be no different, and I don't want this to be a practice that we do once in a blue moon. It's something we should get in the habit of doing, saving for a rainy day every single year.
The proposal I was reading said that the state would put $17 million a month into this rainy day fund, is that right?
So the proposal would be triggered when our accounts receivable or our backlog, whatever you want to call it, I think it's more of an accounts receivable now because we're paying our bills well within a 30-day cycle. When that is at under $3 billion, then the state would automatically have to put in about 1% of revenues into the rainy day fund. So
if you keep the
essentially
debt
it's about,
low, then you can start putting money into savings.
yeah, and so we do it on a monthly basis, so about $17 million or potentially a little bit more a month, equaling, if we were going on a 1% of this year's budget, it would be $215 million in the rainy day fund and $215 million into the pension stabilization fund. We'd be looking to save into both.
Illinois spent millions, I think billions of dollars on late, more than $1 billion in late payment interest penalties. When it had all that debt, that's expensive to do. Your debtors are going to charge you a little extra, and that was costing the state a lot of money. But years ago, as we were starting to pile up this debt, lawmakers were feeling the pain of the onset of all of these new fees, and they said, you know what, let's move our late payment date back. It would be maybe at 2 weeks, then to 30 days, then to 6. Isn't it at 90 days now in Illinois? Where
it's at 90 days. So at the 90-day mark, if the state is not paying its bills on time, it starts to accrue a penalty for late payments, a late payment interest penalty of 1% a month. But that is overly onerous. You're talking about 12% a year. During the budget impasse, in just a 2-year period with no budget, the state racked up over $1 billion. It was $1.104 billion in just 2 years in late payment interest penalties. And the worst part about that, Mark, is that those penalties, those interest payments did not go to the providers who were turned into unwilling lenders to the state. They went to a group of politically connected, wealthy, third-party lenders who came in, bought the debt, the receivables from those struggling vendors, gave them a percentage of what they were owed by the state, and then most of them kept the 12% interest that should have gone to those vendors.
Yeah, they were sort of like corporate payday lenders or financiers who were profiting on the state's debt, and there were a lot of politically connected people in that
yes.
little industry.
And it was wrong. And the way I look at it is, you're not penalizing government by doing the 12% interest, because at the end of the day, let me just be clear, that's not the government's money. That's the people's money. It's taxpayer dollars. And so taxpayers were hurt by the state not being disincentivized from paying its bills late. That penalty was created to serve as a deterrent to paying your bills late, but instead it was used as a crutch by government at the expense of taxpayers.
But that's the question about penalty. So fiscal discipline requires that we don't just say, okay, we can let our bills go 89 days late, and then on the day 90 we start paying. Most other states say that's 30 days. And then they start paying some interest. Should Illinois tighten that ramp and say, okay, we're going to no longer give ourselves that 90-day extension. We're going to say we're going to pay our bills in 30 days.
Well, I'm already doing that, so that's the beauty of this.
Should they write that into the law, where the interest penalties kick in at 30 days?
No, and as a matter of fact, the private sector doesn't even have a 30-day payment cycle. They're usually a net 45 to 60 days. We are really exceeding, I think, anyone's expectations at this point. To put this in perspective, when I became controller, it was about 210 business days. That's about 10 and a half months that businesses had to wait to get paid by this state. It's just unconscionable. Today, my oldest bill is only 17 days old. So I don't need a law to tell me that I should be doing the right thing, which is pay the bills on time. But unfortunately,
maybe you don't. But what if some other comptroller comes in the next election?
I do think that there should be reforms to the way we penalize the state for being late on its bills. But let's say some catastrophe happens that kicks the bill backlog over a 30-day cycle. You're still, as long as you're under 60 days, I think that you're in a solid position. But if there is a penalty that's associated, that penalty should go to the actual vendors who were harmed, not this elite group of wealthy investors that come in, that are all politically connected, by the way, and essentially come in to save the day, but they're really just taking a ton of taxpayer money that should be going to the people that are actually harmed by an impasse or by a late payment delay.
All right, I want to give you a chance to respond to your Republican challenger. If she wins the primary, Shannon Teresi is the Republican running for comptroller. On Twitter, she said something interesting. She said that you're trying to hide the state's bad finances and that you're digging our state deeper into debt. Can you respond to that?
Well, I think I've been the most transparent controller in the history of this state. I think my administration is actually known for its hallmark transparency legislation that allows us now to be able to manage the state's debt. And I think the facts speak for themselves. Look, I had a 210-day delay when I took over this office in paying vendors. Today, my oldest bill is 17 days old. I brought the bill backlog down from almost 17 billion, 16.7 billion to today about 4 billion. And we're paying our bills faster than we have in over 20 years without using federal stimulus funds, which is an important point to make. And by the way, in the middle of a global pandemic. So, oh, and I forgot something, 2 credit upgrades in the middle of a pandemic. So I think that the rating agencies would disagree with my opponent, and proof is in the pudding. We're in a much better fiscal situation today than we were when I took over.
Maybe more to come on those rating upgrades.
Sure.
But one other thing, that we've been talking about some of the policy decisions made in this building. You mentioned the pandemic and you mentioned the federal relief. Congress is also looking at giving Illinois a little bit more time to catch up when it comes to paying back the unemployment insurance trust fund, which is right now probably the biggest elephant in the room, if you will, with the $4.5 billion the state owes into this unemployment insurance trust fund. There's a bipartisan agreement in Congress, I think, to give the state a little bit longer to catch up. How much more time do you think we need to pay that down to a reasonable place?
So as of September 6th of this last year of 2021, we started to accrue interest penalties for not having paid back the $4.5 billion that Illinois still owes to the federal government for the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. That comes out to about $2 million a week in interest penalties that I absolutely detest having to think about paying because it's wasted taxpayer dollars. Now, having said that, to the federal government? To the federal government, yes. So what I asked was, I led an effort for eight states along with Illinois who are still having difficulty paying off this debt. And the reason why these late payment interest penalties, if you want to think about it that way, have taken effect as of September 6th is because that was just an arbitrary date that the federal government set up, thinking that we would no longer be in a pandemic and states would be more flush with cash. But the reality of it is that we're still, very much in a pandemic. When this September 6th date hit, we were in a spike of Omicron at the time. And Illinois is actively in negotiations with all the parties involved to try to figure out how we're going to cobble together the money to be able to pay down this debt. No one's saying we're not going to pay down the debt. We're not asking for the debt forgiveness.
But how much
we're
longer do you need
saying
to pay
give
it
us some time. So the new legislation that Senator Durbin and Congressman Davis and some of our other delegation leaders.
Danny Davis or Rodney Davis?
Congressman Danny Davis.
Danny Davis, okay.
Yes. Anyway, that legislation has just been introduced, and it would extend the deadline on a waiver. So in other words, it would kickstart the waiver again, and it would be retroactive, which is a big deal because we're in for over $40 million in interest payments so far. That would erase those interest payments and give us until September of this year to be able to finalize the debt repayment of that 4.5.
So in the next year, within the next year, you think we can pay it down?
Yeah, we'd have to get it paid off by September 6th of this year.
Very interesting. Last time you were on this program, you said you'd predict a credit ratings upgrade at some point, maybe by June. Are you any clearer or any closer to knowing when that could arrive?
So I don't know if we'll be there by June. I've really given it my best, A-team effort here, but we're certainly moving in the right direction. And even Fitch recently, which is the last holdout here on that full credit upgrade, wrote some very nice things about what we're doing here in Illinois just recently. So I don't know that they're going to meet my June deadline. They have their own deadlines, but I'm certainly pushing them for sooner rather than later. But I do expect that we will be getting that credit upgrade. And I think if the budget passes the way, or even close to what it's been presented, with $500 million more to above and beyond the statutorily minimum on pensions, the $800 million deposits into the Rainy Day Fund, the interfund borrowing being paid off, which we are well on track to do, actually early, Mark, not just by June 30th. If all of those things come together and the governor is able to, with the legislature, pass a balanced budget, I think we're going to see a credit upgrade in the very near future.
All right, Comptroller Susana Mendoza, thank you for joining us. Good to have you back in the building.
Always a pleasure.
In the committees
Always
here.
a pleasure. Yes, thank you.
When we come back, Senate Republican Sally Turner chimes in on a dispute between Blue Cross Blue Shield and Springfield Clinic. Access to affordable health care for tens of thousands of patients in and around the greater Springfield area at risk. That's next.